Hi everyone, Linda from Let's Talk Prepping. And there are so many things going on in the world today that are going to affect us that we have to be prepared for. And I'm going to look at really just two of the things and then try to figure out what we can do to protect ourselves, because that is the ultimate question. How can we protect ourselves from all of these different things? So let's go over here and look at. So we're over here at whatsupwiththat.com. And I just thought this was interesting to show you, nothing to do really with what we were going to discuss. But new evidence that polar bears survived 1,600 years of ice-free summers in the early Holocene. And it said, about 11,000 years ago, the Arctic was virtually ice-free, and the polar bears survived, or they wouldn't be alive today. So that's an interesting article, really nothing to do with what I wanted to talk about tonight. What I want to talk about, first of all, is from Zero Hedge, zerohedge.com. We need rain. Corn, soy, wheat prices soar as drought conditions worsen in the Midwest. So we have a big problem with drought in the Midwest, and the prices are soaring now because there's going to be a shortage of corn, soy, and wheat. And that means you should be preparing now. If you need stuff that's made from corn, if you need wheat, bread, things like that, you can't buy bread and store it for any length of time, but you certainly can buy wheat berries and store them and then make your own flour. But if you look here, you can see how it's devastated. And here are some pictures of the devastation and the corn here. So that's one thing. Now, the real problem we're going to have is with the dollar. We have from newstarget.com, the United Arab Emirates buys 75 tons of physical gold from Russia as the U.S. dollar loses grip on world reserve currency status. Soon as we lose our world reserve currency status, the inflation is going to be just out of this world. It'll be hyperinflation, and the dollar will be worth nothing. And if you just go down here to the last paragraph, it says they're buying it from Russia and making a clear statement as to where they are seeing their alliances move in the future. And we're seeing repeated again and again throughout the world, with nations voting to go with the BRICS and rejecting the U.S. dollar. So that's going to be a really bad thing when we lose our reserve currency. The BRICS are meeting in late August, and eventually they want to have a currency of their own. I haven't seen an agenda, so I don't know if they're ready to put this new currency into effect yet or not. I would venture to guess it's not ready yet. But all of the countries now are trading in their own dollars or for gold, or with gold and silver and commodities. They're not using the U.S. dollar anymore. And when that happens, it's just going to mean it's just going to mean more and more inflation as we go along. So if we go over here to shtfplan.com, the reset, when will globalists attempt to introduce their digital currency system? Then that's what we're all wondering. When is it going to happen? You know they want to do it. So down here, it says the globalists tend to operate in stages of incrementalism, but sometimes they exploit dramatic crises in order to frighten the population into compliance with policies that would have taken decades to institute otherwise. And we saw it with the pandemic. It says most globalist organizations consistently mention the year 2030 as their timelines for finishing the numerous projects they have in place, including the Great Reset, and multiple climate and carbon taxation goals. And the WEF calls it a social contract to transform our world by 2030. The UN just calls it Agenda 2030. So they want this control grid in place within 7 years or less. So do we really have 7 years? I don't think so, but it gives you time to figure out what you should be doing. And it says this is going to be impossible without a bone-rattling crisis of epic proportions. So they have to introduce a number of future mechanisms as a trial run. That way, when a disaster occurs, the public will be acclimated to the solutions that the elites will ask them to adopt later. You know, one disaster of epic proportions would be food shortages. And we talked a little bit about how the corn and the soy and the wheat, and there are many others, cocoa and coffee, all of these shortages. When that comes into effect, think about how they could just introduce the digital currency. You can't buy food unless you buy it with a digital currency. There won't be any food available. It'll only be available in certain areas, certain markets, and you've got to use the digital currency to get it. So that would be something. And Australia now is a guinea pig for the cbdc's, and they have pilot programs there. And it says that once the system exists in one country, it can be copied and adopted by other nations. And the globalists know that countries like America will not accept a fully cashless system without a complete collapse of the existing currency and economy. And that would happen basically if the BRICS get their new currency. Just the way things are going now, our dollar is collapsing, and they're going to push it along if they can, just so they can get this digital currency in. It's just not going to happen otherwise. I have my doubts that many Americans will accept such a system even after a collapse. The majority of Americans, 59%, they said they like to have cash. But 59% is not a good enough number. We need 80, 90% of the people to say no to this. So people know that if they give the government a telescope into their wallets, eventually that information will be used against them. Take away the option of anonymity, and millions of people will resist, even if they have nothing to hide. So conversion to this cashless system would require calamity and force. Well, we have food shortages would be a calamity. Force would be from maybe World War III starting, or us getting involved more with the Russian-Ukraine war, another pandemic, lockdowns due to climate change. All of those could be a calamity and a force. So a full spectrum crisis throughout the U.S. and much of the Western world in the next few years, along with another few years of reconstruction to bring the cbdc into play. And this is interesting. Small businesses would have to be removed from the picture. And that would be because they would accept cash probably, and maybe even do bartering, and that they can't have that. So leaving only major corporations, which could then refuse to accept cash as a means of payment. Now I heard that I think it was Starbucks was refusing cash. And if that's the case, you have a few companies now that are doing it, and as more and more companies do it, people will just get used to it. And it says another rather blunt way to push Americans into the cbdc is the death of the dollar as the world's currency. Only 5 years ago, skeptics argued the dollar would be a king for many decades to come. Today, those same people are quiet as the IMF. This is the International Money Fund. Now, this isn't even the BRIC nations. As the IMF announces their own global cbdc called UMU, and the BRICS quickly move away from the greenback in bilateral trade. So if the IMF is introducing their own cbdc and the BRICS are trying to introduce their own currency, the dollar is in big trouble. So if the U.S. dollar loses a majority of its buying power through inflation and the loss of the reserve status, it may be easier to convince the populace to abandon it for a digital replacement. So, what can you do? That's the question. How can we protect ourselves? Well, if there's going to be a food shortages, you need to stock up on food now as much as possible. The rice, the beans, things like that you can store long term. And I know it's hard. People don't have money. Things are more and more expensive, but that has to be your first priority. Stock up on food. Then you're going to have to stock up on anything else you're going to need. Anything that you really think is going to go skyrocketing in price. Now would be the time to get it. So if the CBDC comes into effect, I mean, you could just say, I'm going to go along with it and leave it at that, but I certainly don't want to go along with it, and I know most of you watching don't want to go along with it. So buy some gold and silver if you can afford it. That can be used later. Maybe, now I've never tried this and I've been thinking about it a lot. Maybe you should buy some cryptocurrency and then store it in a wallet on your own computer and not at like Coinbase or one of those big companies, and then hope that enough places online will allow you to buy things with the cryptocurrency. You might want to start with just a small amount of cryptocurrency. And you might have to look and see what is the best one to buy. Is it Bitcoin? Is it Monero? Is it one of these other ones? What can the government do? Can they stop it and stop you from using it? But that is another thing. And I think the best thing is if the BRICS came up with a new currency would be to invest in their currency. But you know our government will not allow us to invest in it and to buy their currency. So it's not going to be allowed. So what you have to do is be so prepared that this won't affect you, that you don't have to go to the grocery store and buy food, that you don't have to go to the hardware store and buy whatever it is you might need. You have to become a real prepper if you haven't been prepping, and you have to figure out how to get some extra money if you don't have enough money to buy all of these things. And I have a future video coming up on how to use AI to make a little extra money, and that's an interesting video. I think I'll get it up maybe in the beginning of next week. So in the meanwhile, prep as much as possible. Look and see what foods are going to be short. Stock up on them, especially if you use them, especially if you like bread and you want to stock up on wheat, cocoa, coffee, other things like that are going to be short. And please subscribe and please comment if you have anything to tell us. And thanks again for watching.